There were 3 families this summer.
Welcome, everybody. We are so glad that some people are in person and online. We are in for a treat.
Should
So
I move over?
no, because you will be. If you talk, Galit, you'll be front and center. We have our little otter, not otter, owl that moves around. But welcome.
So
you can all hear us. Give me a thumbs up, Amy or Holon. Esther, can you hear us? You hear us?
Probably not.
Yes, you can. Okay, perfect. You can hear us. Can someone talk to make sure we can hear you? Someone who's unmuted, can someone speak so we can hear you? Amy,
I can say something. Can you hear me?
Eugene, we can hear you. Perfect. Wonderful. So
very good. Very good.
Thank you. So we are in for a treat because for those who joined us this morning, Rabbi Kedem taught our Bible class, and we only got to 4 verses of Samuel because it was such an interesting conversation and dynamic. And we debriefed after our Bible class, and they said they loved it, and they love having you teach and to share a different perspective than we normally do, and that's the beauty of Torah. And so today we get to learn a little bit more with. I shared this in Bible class. The reason I connected with Rabbi Kedem is that as you know, we have a cantorial soloist that's joined us in a few months, Shimon Smith, and so and we got a list of references, and so one of them was here. So if we don't like him, then we'll blame you. But you can tell us a little bit about him as well.
If you don't like him, blame me. Let's.
But we
are lucky, blessed.
Mm-hmm.
He's lucky, and you're lucky.
Thank you. But we had a conversation, and I instantly gravitated towards you, and we talked a lot about what it means to have a partnership. It's something that is important to me. That we don't really have a home synagogue in Israel, and what does that mean to really have a deep partnership? Perhaps, and we started dreaming, what does that look like? Do we do a joint Bible class? Do we do a book club? Do we have cross-cultural experiences together? And so I knew that Rabbi Kedem was coming this way, and she let me know she was in New York for a couple of days, and she said, I would love to come and meet our community and meet our clergy, and so you are here, and so we're so glad that you're here.
Thank you for this opportunity.
So we have the opportunity to learn a little bit about what's happening in your community, what happened in Israel, conversation. Please, people who are online, you can unmute yourselves. If you have questions, raise your hand. We can see you.
If you don't cut me off, I won't feel like I'm at home.
All right.
You gotta do that. Okay, great. So are we good? Okay. So shalom. This is these are the crazy times we're in, where I can be on Zoom in the morning and in person for lunch, and vice versa. This is great. I'll just tell you a little bit about my story and introduce myself, and then this is really my favorite part is eating and talking. Right? It's so Jewish, right? Let's talk with full mouths and enjoy, and it's all good. But really, I'm here to get to know you and to share a little bit of what I do back home, and to start dreaming about what it means to have, I joke, it's as a rabbi, we do a lot of shidduch making, right? Not just the kind that ends hopefully in marriages, but all kinds. So I'm always curious how the network and how the Jewish geography comes together and people get to know each other and have meaningful relationships. So that's where I'm coming from. So you must say to yourself, she says she's Israeli, but she sort of has an American accent. People sometimes say, are you from Boston? I'm like, why Boston? From all places. So I am a mutt. My mom's American, my dad's Israeli. My mom was born 1947 in Austria. She's a single child of Holocaust survivors. And my grandfather, Alav Shalom, smuggled weapons for the Haganah, for the resistance during the British Mandate. And he was on the blacklist. So when they wanted to immigrate to Canada, they couldn't, because he was on the list of the people that were not granted entrance to anything that has to do with the British colonies. And They really wanted to come to Israel, but my grandmother was afraid. She said, I just survived Auschwitz and I can't do another camp. So finally, they found a sponsor in Washington Heights in New York. That's the way it was done once upon a time. And that sponsor, I don't know what it was, $100, $200, right? You think about it today, especially with everything that's going on in the Ukraine and how do you help? And with that sponsorship, they could enter as displaced persons. I actually found, now that we were in America, we found my mom's certificate. You see her with that 50s hairdo. And, so she grew up in Washington Heights. Years later, she met my father. My father's a whole different story. I joke that I have a Palestinian father, not because he's Palestinian Arab, it's because his family's been in Israel for 6 generations. They're Sephardic Jews. They speak Ladino. They spoke, well, most of them are no longer with us. And he grew up in a family of 5 siblings. All of them were Jerusalemites. He was the first one to be born in southern Tel Aviv. He was in elementary school when the War of Independence started. And when my parents met, we were shidduch in the public library in New York. There was a 13-year difference between them. My dad says that he keeps young, thanks to my mom. He's right. He's a young 87-year-old. He didn't speak English. She didn't speak Hebrew. And once I asked the question, so how did you know you wanted to marry him? She said, he had a nice smell. So I guess what they say in science, it's true. And it's true. My father really always smells really nice. So they had my brother and myself. We lived in Long Island, West Hempstead. And one day my brother, who went to a Schechter school, which is kind of funny because I ended up being a rabbi and he really has nothing to do with Judaism these days. So he's the one who went to yeshiva. He came back and he shared this poem that he won an award for. And my parents, they were kvelling. They said, let's read this poem. And they read this beautiful poem about the sea. My mom and my dad look at each other and they say, that's it. We're going back. My mother didn't have a family here so much. My father had a huge family in Israel. He misses the beaches of Tel Aviv. That's how they read this poem. And literally within 3 months, they packed the entire house. So, left their jobs. My mom's a psychologist. My dad was a medical photographer and moved to Israel. And they told us, I was 6. They said, we're going for a year for a pilot and we'll see if this works out for us, we'll stay. And we ended up staying. When we finally unpacked all our stuff a year after we moved for that first year, this E.E. Cummings poetry book fell out and there was a weird piece of paper stuck in between the pages. And when my mom opened it, lo and behold, she found a very familiar poem, which my brother handed in as his writing project, and his teacher did not know. It was before the internet, right?
We should look it up.
So I joke that we moved to Israel thanks to an E.E. Cummings poem, which I'm sure he did not intend when he wrote the poem about the sea. So I grew up in Tel Aviv. And it's interesting because, and this happens to many Israelis, I think, that when we lived in the States, I knew I was Jewish. You were loosely affiliated conservative, high holidays, like twice a year kind of Jews. But we lit candles and we had Kiddush, and my parents would let me go trick-or-treating because, we have Hanukkah and it was Purim, and it was like this whole thing, and I knew I was Jewish. My grandmother, the Auschwitz survivor, came from a very educated family, and they were, I would say, almost assimilating in many ways. And she went to the conservatorium, she was a musician. Of course, when Hitler came to power and later on conquered Poland and Lithuania, she had to leave the school, and she was fighting against the school, like to let the Jewish students stay. Of course, she did not succeed in that. But I remember she had this strong Eastern European accent. She was a very small woman, very elegant, heavy smoker, so she would make Viennese schnitzel in the kitchen, right? So take that lamb, or is it a veal, right? Hang it very, very, very thin, put it in egg and butter crumb, and of course, butter, right? That's how you make Viennese schnitzel. cool. So I'm standing there next to my savta, my grandma, and she's making it, and my brother and I say, well, we heard that you're not supposed to combine. And she said, smoking in the kitchen, kosher is what comes out of your mouth, not what goes into your mouth. And for me, it was one of the most profound Jewish teachings. I mean, I do choose to keep kosher my way, but this idea that I grew up with, that Judaism isn't about the law of it. It's about the spirit of keeping a sense of ethics, right? Midot, we call them in Hebrew, like just to be a mensch. That's really what I learned for my savta. And when we moved to Israel, it was like, do you remember the game Pac-Man? Remember that? It was like this huge Pac-Man called Israeli identity that swallowed our Jewish identity. And we were Israelis. We were no longer Jews because 99% of the people around me in Tel Aviv were Jewish. And if they weren't, I probably didn't even know it. Like the assumption, you're Jewish, right? We understand now the problematics of this and the segregation and how we should be more involved. And of course, as an adult and as a mother, and as an educator, and as a rabbi, I talk about this often. But as a kid, it was like a default. Of course, we're Jewish. So yeah, we did Friday night dinners, but everyone did Friday night dinners. Right? Well, we celebrated Purim, but the supermarket had Hamantashen. So, and in a way, this is the critique of Israeli society. We all became lazy Jews. Mm-hmm. You can't be a lazy Jew here in America. You can't. I mean, we worked so hard this year to put together a sukkah in California just to figure out how you're going to get the branches and this and that. We worked hard at it. In Israel, it's like, it's a dream come true, right? The public sphere is Jewish. So you sort of let go. And I think that is part of the challenge we have as liberal Jews in Israel, as Reform Jews in Israel, progressive Jews. You choose your taste in words, to reclaim the Jewish component of our Israeli identity. And it's kind of funny, right? Because you're thinking, what do you have to reclaim? It's Jewish by default. But if it's Jewish by default, it's Orthodox by default. So when I started a congregation in Holon, which I'll talk about a little bit soon, the first thing I noticed is that when you send your child to an Israeli public school, remember, there's no separation between synagogue and state. By definition, your child will be educated in Judaism. There's a Bible class every week, right? But by default, it's not necessarily the Jewish values and practices that you have at home. So when our oldest daughter, we have 3 kids, Hodayan, who's 15, Uli, who just had his bar mitzvah in Sacramento, 13, it's great to have it here, and a 6-year-old named Ivli, which I think is more of our grandson than our child. Not sure we're doing a very good job there, but gotta check out that issue sometimes. But I noticed that the Israeli public kindergarten, for instance, let's take this as an example. Friday at kindergarten, public school, remember, this is public, state-funded. There's Kabbalat Shabbat service, right? So there's chalot, and grape juice, and candles. What happens in a quintessential Israeli kindergarten? The boy, Abba Shel Shabbat, listen to the terminology, the father of Shabbat, is wearing a kippah. His father doesn't wear a kippah. His grandfather doesn't wear a kippah. But all of a sudden, he's wearing a kippah. So he puts a kippah on, and of course, he holds the Kiddush cup up and says the bracha, because he's a father. And the girl, of course, there's always a girl, with a little cutesy white dress. Jody does. She's Ima Shel Shabbat. She's the mother of Shabbat. And she takes a little shmatik, puts it on her hair as if she was in the shtetl. Her mother doesn't do it. Her grandmother doesn't do it. But now we're doing Jewish. okay? And she says the bracha for the challah, which of course she should learn how to bake because she's a girl, okay? And this is Shabbat service in kindergarten, right? So by default, unless you sort of challenge and disrupt this, you're getting a picture of Judaism, which is a very specific picture. And it doesn't necessarily tell the story of the Jewish peoplehood today. It definitely doesn't tell the story of the family that sends their children to this kindergarten. So that's what we have to deal with. And just pay attention, I didn't say a word about conversion. I didn't say a word about the Kotel. I'm not even talking about the political sphere, okay? That's interesting. My rabbi and friend, who's now a member of Knesset, the first Israeli Reform rabbi to be a member of Knesset, Gilad Cohen, an amazing visionary individual and leader. He deals with the politics, okay? I'm not saying that what I'm doing is not political, but I'm doing grassroots. I'm changing things from the ground, from the ground up. I'm saying, okay, what if in Holon, in public kindergartens, we'll offer a different take. Whoever's interested. Okay, it doesn't work for everyone, different strokes, it's all good. But what if in a kindergarten that is progressive, we will say there's no longer Ima Shel Shabbat and Abba Shel Shabbat, but the receivers of Shabbat, Mekablei Shabbat, notice the gender, it can be two boys, it can be two girls, it can be a girl and a boy. They get this big basket, there are lots of types of head coverings. Some of them have pink with little, nice things, and some of them are hats, and some of them are huge kippas, and some of them have words on them, and some of them don't. And some of them actually were donated by American congregations with all the funky baseball and all that cute stuff that we don't have back home. Imagine they would have this big basket and it would say, you can choose. You want to cover your hair? Great. You don't want to cover your hair? Okay, we're okay with it. And start there. And it doesn't always have to be that the voice is, right? So we're and is this social change? Well, this kindergarten is running for 8 years now. From one kindergarten, we have 3 kindergartens. So now we have hundreds of alumni. And you imprint in a very early stage the idea that, wait, there's more than one way to do Jewish. That's it. Just opening alternatives. Just saying, I was a little confused. Apparently there's more, there's another way, there's an alternative. So I grew up in Tel Aviv. I went in the army. I was commander and teacher of new immigrants from the former USSR. And I was trained to teach Hebrew. Hebrew is my gateway into Judaism. I have my first degree also in linguistics and ancient Hebrew language, and this is something that I've been working with a lot. But I remember I was a commander in the IDF, and these soldiers used to ask me questions about Judaism. And here I was, a geek, a nerd, a bookworm. I knew more about the French Revolution going to Alliance, a French school in Tel Aviv, than I knew about the Talmud, right? Because the classic Israeli education, that's changing now, but I'm 46. So the classic Jewish education is that you learn Tanakh, right, the Bible, and then you learn what happens from the Palmach.
Yeah.
You know what the Palmach is, right? One of the groups that were forming the state of Israel and the idea. And everything that happened in Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, between the Tanakh and the Palmach, is a mystery. Okay, it has to do with how Zionism sort of builds itself, and okay. So when I decided to get my degree in Hebrew language and ancient Hebrew literature, I was sitting in classes with some of my Orthodox friends. We had to take Mishnah and we had to take Talmud, and I was at a loss. There I was, so proud of my geekiness and my bookwormness, and I would sit there and not know how to read a page of Talmud. And I was 20, right? I finished the year, I was 20, almost 21. The first time I opened Talmud was at a Hebrew university. And then I said, okay, I need to catch up. I need to catch up. I live in Jerusalem, I'm studying in Jerusalem. This will be easy, right? I can go study Talmud anywhere. I can, after hours, get some, catching up. So I started looking for places to study Talmud in Jerusalem, and I got recommendations for all these great places, and they would say, oh, we're so happy you're here. Oh, by the way, we wear a skirt. Or, we're so happy you're here. Let us introduce you to a family that could be your host family for Shabbat. Come do Shabbat with them. And I'd be like, wait, how does studying Talmud connect it to the length of my sleeve in August in Jerusalem? Like, I don't understand. Like, or why do I need an adopted family? I love my family. I'm going home to see them for Friday night. Like, a part of me was like, how is this a package deal? Why, if I want to explore my Jewish identity, I find myself in Orthodox establishments, very nice, very learned, very inspirational, no problem with that. That's not what I needed. And at the beginning, every change starts when you think I'm the only crazy one. I'm the only one who doesn't want this, right? That's how it starts. But then you start talking to people like, wait a minute, I'm not alone in this. So I ended up going to what used to be one of the ongoing Talmud classes of the Reform movement in Jerusalem, because that was just accessible. They also gave a little scholarship, which was important for the student that was trying to make ends meet. And there I was studying with Professor Muhammad Weiss and with Yochi Brandes and with some of the rabbis that teach at the HUC, and this whole new world opened up to me. And I said, wait a minute, you can study Talmud, and no one jumps at you and tells you not to turn the light on Shabbat. Like, it's okay, you can still do your thing and hold on to your feminist, liberal, egalitarian ideas. That's what I was raised with, your Zionist ideas. And I came full, I didn't come empty, right? I told you, my family has a long history of being Jewish. So no one's gonna tell me now that what I have or do is not enough. That's just absurd. That doesn't work with how I understand Judaism, right? And later on, I became a Hebrew teacher. I was a teacher at the overseas school for academics who come to study in Jerusalem, the school there for Hebrew. And one day the manager came in, she said, oh, there's this school, the Upper West Side. One of their Hebrew teachers had to come home because their mother is sick. Are you willing, single, I just finished my degree. She knew I was she's like, why don't you hop on a plane and go? And I actually found myself 2 weeks after September 11th working at Road of Shalom, the Upper West Side. And aside from the amazing experience of seeing private Jewish education is in the Upper West Side, and can you imagine how different it is from where I came from? I think one of the biggest problems was that I was trying to do Hebrew immersion with these students, elementary school students, and in Hebrew, when you want someone to stop something, you say "die." So 2 weeks after that, I was called into the office that one of the students told their parents that I need to kill them.
No.
Yeah. So I was like, maybe the Hebrew immersion needs a little bit more explanation before I. Die is it's a very common word in Hebrew. It doesn't mean die. It means we'll stop them. You do Pilates, die. It's neutral. But it's just one example. I know you, and I'm going to figure out where I know you from. Well, we're going to do this. My head is scanning. Scanning. So I'm saying, that was a moment where I was in New York, Manhattan, I was single, and it was like putting a child in a candy store, just doing Jewish. So one Friday I would go to this shul, and the other one I went there, and then they started the Hadar Minyan, and I was like, wait a minute, this is the richness. I mean, isn't it? I always laugh that you had to go to Manhattan, on the Upper West Side, to be religiously liberated. And by the way, I think this is still relevant for today. When my congregants in Holon meet Reform Jews from the States, it is a paradigm shift, because all of a sudden we have all these values that we share. And oh yeah, sure, we have a female chazanit or a female rabbi, things that are taken more for granted, at least in the past years here. It empowers the congregation that I have. Okay, so moving ahead, I got a phone call one day from Hebrew College, and they said, we got your name, we heard you're doing this, you're doing that. I was doing a lot of communal work, Bet Tfilah Israeli, which is a non-denominational, that's what I was looking for, congregation in Israel. And they heard it, and they called and said, why don't you apply to become rabbi in Israel? It's the other way around. They call people and say, go for it, right? I'm hoping HUC here won't have to start doing that soon, but that's a whole other conversation. So they called, they said, it's Rabbi Nir Balkin, who is my mentor and teacher today, said, you don't know me. He's from Modi'in. He said, you don't know me, I think you should apply to do this. And, I try to be polite, but I was laughing my head off. I mean, I was just like, right? So my husband of a few months walks in and I say, you're not gonna believe it, you're gonna laugh, you took this off. I just called and I was told that I should apply to be a rabbi. And he said, why are you laughing? You should totally do it. I'm like, what? I married this Chiloni guy from Holon. Like, why are you in rabbi? He's like, well, you define what rabbinate means, right? He really encouraged me to apply. And at the beginning, I was like, well, I'll just study. I won't be ordained. I can grow up dati. I'm not religious. And I went through, and it took me a long time to be ordained, not because I was lazy, it's because I had our second child in the middle and my master's degree from Bar Ilan. And I ended up starting a congregation and an educational system in Holon. So I was a little busy, but so it took me I want to say 5 years, maybe 6. My dad's like, you could have become a dentist already.
That's what my dad said too.
Yeah, right? What's up with the dentist? Who wants to be a dentist? But then again, who wants to be a rabbi? But that's a whole other conversation. Sometimes there are similarities. So I ended up going to Hebrew College in Jerusalem. And while I was there, I was approached by then the CEO of the movement, now the member of Knesset Gilad Karev, and he said, I heard you're moving to Holon. Now, has anyone here been to Holon? Yeah? That's fine. Yeah,
I lived there.
You lived in Holon. This did not happen to me in New Jersey yet. This is a first. Okay, if you want to share a little bit, you can. Take your time.
I'll chew my bagel first.
Don't choke on this. Anyone from Zoom, have you been to Holon? Anyone?
I've been to Holon.
You've been to Holon. What'd you see there?
The Purim parade.
The Purim parade.
Yep.
The
Right.
Adloyada, of course.
Yeah.
The Adloyada is a very big, for 2 years now it was canceled. It's heartbreaking. 3 years, 2 years. So third Adloyada. Holon is
Very Russian speaking.
very
Extremely Russian speaking.
Yes, it is quintessential Israel.
Yeah.
You have everything. I'm always trying to think, what's the equivalent in America? What do you have that if you look at their voting tendencies, you know what's going to happen in the general, that's Holon, right? Aside from Arabs, you have every group in Israel, in Jews, you have every group in Israel represented in Holon, and by the same percentage, okay? So in many ways, if you tell an Israeli, I met a Reform rabbi from Holon, unless they've been in touch with me in any way, shape, or form, they'll be like, he must be confused. No, not Holon. Because Holon was perceived as the heart of Israel. It's the Reform movement in Israel was doing very well with expats, very well with people that had liberal progressive backgrounds. I'm going to say this, that are upper class, educated, left wing. This is not the case for Holon. So when I share with people at the beginning, 12 years ago, when I just started a congregation, I would say, this is what I'm going to do. I would get a lot of encouraging comments. And I remember once I met with a rabbi, I will not name names, he's wonderful, who explained to me for 25 minutes why a young woman, there's no way she can start a congregation in Holon. It's not going to work, which was the best pep talk I've ever got. That's just the way I am. I just need someone to say, it's not going to work. Reverse psychology really works whatever. And so 12 years ago, my husband and I, then we had 2 little children under 3, so we moved to Holon because his parents are living in Holon, and they said, we'll help you out. And we're like, take them, right? And my parents lived in Tel Aviv, they're like, we'll help you out. We're like, come. So we were living in Holon. And for a year, I just worked in community centers, and I was in the closet. I'd be like, yeah, I studied Judaism in Jerusalem. So I said, I'll be back. Right? Didn't tell them I was, because it was and even if I tried to explain, it was I was from Mars. It's 12 years ago when I would say, Ani Rabbah. I will talk about this word in a moment. Ani Rabbah, they'd be like, huh? Remember my daughter, we were joking about one of the options for the talk today, I told you is my mother, your mother is a what? Right? Because my daughter told the kindergarten assistant teacher that her mother's a rabbi, and she used the female term in Hebrew. No, in English, rabbi could be both genders. In Hebrew, rav is male, and rabbah is female because Hebrew is so genderfied. And so she said, "Ima sheli rabbah," and the teacher said, "There's no such thing." And my daughter came home and she's like, "I think you exist." So 12 years ago, when I had to explain what this is, and I wasn't even a rabbi yet, I was still a student, it was like, "Oh, you're a rebbitzin." I'm like, no, I'm not married to a rabbanit. They always like, "What does that mean? But you don't look like a rabbi, and you're wearing pants." And I was like, "Well, it's impolite to come without pants." Like, it was just so confusing that, like, I admit it, and many times I'm just like, I would lie. I would go to, like, you go to places and they want to make conversation with you. Like, for instance, you're giving birth, right? And the midwife is like, "So what do you do?" And I'm just like, teacher.
I do that as well on the airplane.
Yeah, plane.
You're like, "I don't want this theological conversation for 3 hours now."
When
Like,
my wife was giving birth this last time, the anesthesiologist found out I was a rabbi, and she loved it. She loved it. She called her rabbi to let her, after asking the HIPAA violations, if they said, "Oh, can I call my rabbi?" Which I knew who he was, and so it was a whole thing. So
that's hilarious.
yeah, so my wife was not happy. She was like, "Just give me the epidural."
You're not I literally, wow, I really relate to that because I was like, my husband was like being facetious. He could tell that I was in pain, so he wanted to make me laugh. So I was like, "Oh, teacher. And then he says, "No, you're not. Tell her what you do." And there I am, like, "Yeah, I'm a rabbi, and I'm like in construction, like I'm trying to give birth." And then she's like, and she's wearing a head covering. Obviously, she's Orthodox. I'm like, "What are you getting me into?" And she's like, "Well, I really think Reform Judaism is one of the reasons of assimilation." And I'm like, "Oh, we're not going to talk about that now." But it's, that's the way it was because you were like an alien. You were like a crypto Jew, to conceal. I have to say, 13 years later, this ain't the case anymore. And this is revolutionary that in a decade you can see the difference. I walk into a room, I always ask, who's ever been to a Reform setting of any chance or met a Reform male or female rabbi? Once upon a time, no one would raise their hands. Now about a third of the room says, "Oh, I went to a bar mitzvah, a funeral, a wedding, my cousin's wife's neighbor's niece, ex, whatever, is a rabbi," because we're 120 Israeli rabbis now that were ordained in Israel. And the number of congregations has doubled itself. And Holon is one of those new congregations, right? We have the ones that I'm sure if you visited Israel and visited Reform congregations, you've been to Kol HaNeshama in Jerusalem, Holon in Jerusalem, Mevaseret Zion has been for a while, even Modi'in, that's now 25 years old. I mean, these are congregations that have been in Leobek and Haifa. I mean, these are the pioneers of the movement. But for many years, it froze. There were like 10, 13, now we're 53 congregations. So when we decided to move to Holon, Rabbi Galit Cohen, now MK Galit Cohen, said to me, "You should start a congregation in Holon." I said, "Give me a year to figure out where I am." By the way, I thought he would pay me for that year. That wasn't. Give me a year to figure out where I am, and then we'll see where it's going. So it started with 5 people in my living room. And I asked them, "So what do you want? Like, what's your dream? Why do this? Why have a chavua?" I thought it would be just a chavua or something. And I figured out 3 things. And I'm fast forwarding 12 years later that we're over 150 families now in this congregation. By the way, without a building. This whole congregation is all around the city. In COVID, it was a wonderful advantage, I have to say. But we're ready for a building. But, and I'll talk about that for a moment, maybe too. But I found out 3 things, and you might identify, if you listen to what people need and not just what they want, if you use community organizing tools, and you come curious to these conversations, you get very interesting answers. Instead of coming and saying, "This is what a Jewish community does. We do 1, 2, 3, 4, and we have 6, 7, 8, 20, 52 committees," right? That's it. Here's what we do, plug yourself in. This is the old model, build it and they will come. What I found conducive to building a new congregation is coming open and saying, okay, what do you need? What are you preoccupied with? Where can Judaism enrich your lives? Okay, what does the knowledge of this ancient tradition have to offer us today? And there were three main answers. Number one, dealing with alienation. City of Holon used to be a small town. Now there are high rises everywhere. People don't know their neighbors anymore. Once upon a time, there's stories, I would leave the door open, the neighbor would come in, right? They have this nostalgia. I don't know if it even existed ever, but they have this like romantic nostalgia saying, we used to live in a country that was hinged, that was warm, that was communal. Now we fight over parking spaces. What's going on? We no longer feel this connection to the people around us. So that sense of community and connection was lost. Number two, people were very worried about public education. Goes back to what I was telling you earlier. We're two mothers. How is our kid going to be accepted? Okay. We are people who came into Judaism from a cultural perspective. Is my kid going to be taught Judaism as an Orthodox approach? Or other people who say, well, this is number three, my grandfather used to lead the Seder and it was beautiful. Now I have to lead the Seder. And I don't know how to do it anymore. Remember we talked about the lazy Jews? You receive it, but if you actually have to lead it and do it, many people do not feel empowered to do so. And I listened to those things and I said, wait a minute, Judaism knows how to do this. You don't have to make it up. Judaism knows how to build community. Judaism knows how to do intergenerational education. Judaism knows how to do education. These are the pillars of our ideas. So a year after we started to do Friday night musical family services in the park with a guitar, which were going really well, we started the first kindergarten. And basically this is the Congregation Holon is a community that started a school system, and now the school system is creating the community. So that's sort of how it worked. We call the congregation Kodesh Holon. First of all, it's from the Havdalah service, right? It's a play on words because of Holon sand, I was talking about that a little earlier. But the idea is really, and I think that's what I try to do also this morning with the Torah class, is coming from life to Torah, from the Chol to the Kodesh, and then back to the Chol. Because I think if Judaism is just about kashrut, and just about prayers, and just about, holidays, then the questions of, is it a Jewish thing of me to buy a plastic bottle? I think no. I had no choice, I was dehydrated. But I couldn't find my reusable bottle. But the ethics towards climate change, is that a Jewish choice? Okay? The way that I react to the war in the Ukraine, is that a Jewish voice within me that leads the way, how to do it, right? So I'm curious on how Judaism can inspire everyday life questions, and not just, how long my skirt is, what does the Siddur say, and what kind of kashrut do I have at home? I feel like in Israel, Judaism actually sort of shrunk, and I want to reopen it and say, to go to shop or not to shop in IKEA? It's a Jewish question, right? To tip or not to tip? To support an organization that is racist or not? These are questions, right? It's what Reform congregations like to call tikkun olam, right? So this is the idea of saying we want a just society. We want a society that is based on values and not seeing each other as tools, okay? That's a Jewish concept because we were all created in the image of God. So obviously, we can't just treat other people like they're vehicles. They are neshamot, okay? So these questions are very interesting to me. And when we started the school system, things started rolling. So it's been a roller coaster now for 12 years. And by now we have quite a presence. I mean, we have 55 WhatsApp groups. When I left to come here, I left 55 WhatsApp groups. So there's a lot going on, but it's a lot of groups that are doing many, many things. We also congregate, of course, for holidays and for Torah studies and for things like that.
When you say a school system, do you mean like supplementary education, or is it It's
a public, nation-founded day school system. It's a little bit like, I think, the charter schools here. That's what I'm learning. So it's like, it was the first magnet kindergarten. Like if you, I always joke, it was a self-selected group. If you could deal with a female reform rabbi, you're in. If you can't, this is not the right place for you, right? It was like a little bit of a deal breaker for some, you know.
And the school is funded by the state.
By the state. So my congregation doesn't pay for the building, the teachers, the insurance. It also has its limitations because you are constantly in touch with the Board of Education and the municipality. You know, there are other things that interest them aside from is the Reform congregation happy with this specific teacher or not. It's complicated. But my goal is to plug into funds that would have been given to Orthodox entities and to work creating justice in that way, right? If this is a public system and there's no separation between synagogue and state, and I'm not even going if there should be or there shouldn't be. I actually think there shouldn't be, but I think we should just enlarge the idea of what kind of synagogue is the synagogue and state. But that's a separate conversation. That's a political conversation. On the ground, I said, let's plug into anything like that exists anyway and Jewify it by our terminology of what it means to be Jewish. So we started kindergartens, it turned to 3 kindergartens. We started a school within a school, grades 1 through 6. And of course, at the Bnei B'not Mitzvah program, I will never forget the first bat mitzvah I had. We're still at 5 to 1. For every 5 boys that has a bar mitzvah, we have 1 girl that has a bat mitzvah. So I started this program that's called Atvani. It's like quality time for moms and daughters at the 6th grade bat mitzvah age. And in Israel, it's 12 for girls and 13 for boys. We're not there yet. It's about feminism and social media and Judaism, and it's taught by a rabbi. And at the end, it's like, oh, by the way, you want to do Torah reading, you can also do that here. So that's been a great way to outsource it. We have hundreds of families that went through this program. Some of them stayed for about mitzvah, but I can assure you, they all know what Reform Judaism is. So we were trying to find ways to outreach in that sense. And after 12 years of moving from parks and renting all kinds of rooms and asking for favors from this community center and that community center, our last home was actually in an old age home. I mean, I'm sure that wasn't a politically correct term, like assisted living or hardline one. It was in their foyer. It was actually kind of funny because the elevator would go up and down, and every time during the Shema you'd hear, but we were there for a while until COVID started, and then of course it was unsafe for us to be there for the residents, and since there we've been in parks, and now we're renting, and it's a lot of money. Why should we rent when the Orthodox congregation next door doesn't have to rent? I really, really deeply don't understand. I don't think everything should be reform. I'm really happy there's a diverse, but it's gotta be equality here. So, 7 years ago, we asked for a piece of land. We said if they're giving out pieces of land to build synagogues, then we should be on the list. And we went through all the ropes, and it was supposed to be okay, but then it got stalled. Every month I would get a different, we couldn't make it on the agenda, we didn't convene, the person that was supposed to sign this wasn't there, and on and on and on and on. And finally, the Religious Action Center, my friend said to me, Galit, let's sue him. And I said, I don't want to sue because these are people I have to work with. And I want a relationship. They said, you're naive. I said, no, you know what? Let's send someone to the mayor, a friend of a friend that's connected to blah, 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 blah. Let's ask the mayor off the record what to do. And this person, the mediator, came. He said, listen, the reform movement now has been waiting for this piece of land for 7 years. What's going on? And he said, sue me.
Oh.
That was lesson number 1 for me, politics. He said, I have ultra-Orthodox people in my coalition in City Hall. Sue me. And then I'll be like, what can I do? I had to give the piece of land. It was the court sitting here and really, okay? So we sued. It was like almost a joke. Like the lawyer said to me, Lori who now runs the Religious Action Center, and she's amazing. Orly Erez-Lachovsky, you should really meet with her and Zoom with her because she's doing amazing work in Israel. anti-racism work and just great Jewish values that are coming to life. Like, basically the judge looked at the municipality and said, seriously? Like, take care of this. So within a few months, all of a sudden, after 7 years that was quiet, we were allocated a piece of land. And then I was off for a year to work in David in California. And this is very exciting. Because as I mentioned before, unlike the Zion or certain areas in Jerusalem or even Tel Aviv Daniel centers, right? Holon is quintessential Israel, which means it's working class. I mean, this is not, it's like this, like the Frank Sinatra song, right? If we can make it there, we can make it anywhere, right? Because like, we enter the heart of Israel, but we don't have the resources in this specific community, right? To build something. And we also said to ourselves, we're not gonna build anything fancy. We see what's happening. We don't want a building that we would be now working to maintain. So we're building something kind of funky. It's multifunctional. There are a lot of trees on the small property. It's like 10,000 square foot. And they're like 12 trees or maybe more. And they're adult trees. So by Jewish law and by Israeli law, you can't uproot them. So we're working around the trees. So it's like little buildings that are multifunctional, green, very modest, and you build this whole thing. And we're actually starting a campaign now to start to see if in the next 3 years, we can build the first phase, which is approximately $1.5 million. That's what we're looking at for this building. And we have big plans for it because we have so many activities going on anyway. We have a youth movement. It started with 5 kids, now it's 45 kids. We have a thrift store that's generating income for the community. That's also a gemach. It gives out, acts of loving kindness to the larger community, hospitals and hostels and so on. And we want a local cafe because Holon doesn't have a lot of cafes, so we're thinking about that. And we want a center for sustainability and to have a community garden, right? And we want to have classrooms for all our classes and courses. And we want the main sanctuary to have a Torah ark that's on wheels, that we can wheel it out and wheel it in, right? So we can have all kinds of things happening. Like we won't have this like sanctuary social hall thing. Everything is in one because now, unlike America, then it's like, are you crazy? You're building a building in this economy? I think in Israel, it's like giving up on this is almost like committing suicide politically. Like you cannot say no to a piece of land. It's the complete opposite of what it is here. So this is a whole new phase in our congregational life. Of course, we have a committee, and we found these wonderful architects that are leading the way, and it's exciting to see the next step. I feel like we're moving from startup to establishing it, and I'm very, very excited about this. And I'm also very intrigued to see how the building is not going to take over. The sense of there's a lot of entrepreneurship and informality in Israel, which I'm learning is actually a really big, advantage to do things lightly and spontaneously and so on. So this is where we're at. I took a year to come learn here to see how you guys do things in larger congregations and more established congregations with a long history. 12 years isn't a long history. I'm learning a lot. I'm very homesick. I can't wait to go home, back to my congregation. And I'm also very proud that we all vaccinated for COVID, and they also got I got a vaccine against the founder syndrome. Because many times when there's founder of the congregation, it's like, and here they're getting along just fine without me. Okay, not that okay. But it's the dream of every founder to see. It's like a parent. You want to see that your kid's okay. You don't have to come. You want them to need you and like you, if possible. But that they're okay without you. They can do things. And I think this year, congregation is really owning its own story and its own activities, and it's lovely to watch from afar. I really am kvelling. I'm like, oh, I can't believe they organized Purim again. 250 people came to Purim. We started a band. We call it the Mamas and Papas, Avot V'Imahot, because it's also a wink on liturgy and Reform liturgy, right? Because that's one of the changes between Orthodox and Reform liturgy, adding the matriarchs. So they're called the patriarchs and the matriarchs. It's a local band that's by amateur musicians that have other day jobs and their parents in the community. And so they give their annual concert. And they organized this magnificent, it's like there was no room. They rented a sports center and there wasn't room. There were hundreds of people that came for Megillah reading. And it's just, it feels right. So, and maybe I'll finish this with this, and then I'm curious for any challenges and questions, and you can ask the hard questions, please do. Those are the ones that help me the most. When Golda Meir would come to America, her trick, her thing would be, oh, Jewish guilt, look at us, those Yemenite children, we need to help them, we need to feed them, you know, you, Jews in America, you're better off, you should help the poor Israelis. It worked, by the way. It generated beautiful donations that were the foundation of everything in Israel. Ben-Gurion came with a different paradigm. Do you remember how Ben-Gurion would fundraise? What did he ask? I mean, there are several people that remember those generations. Bonds. Buy an Israeli bond. What is an Israeli bond? Invest in Israel. It's a winning horse, okay? And those have been the two paradigms of the relationship. And I want to offer a third paradigm. And again, this is not my idea, okay? I'm just part of this, I think, a group of people that is trying to change the paradigm. I think our challenge today is to really have a relationship. Like, to be the people you pick up the phone to when you're curious how things are going. And that's your personal connection to the place. It's no longer just, we gave money to Israel, or we voted for the right politician because they support Israel, right? It has to be a more personal, value-based partnership that you know that you really can feel that we are one people. I'm afraid that Israeli politics and so many other reasons have tainted this idea of Am Yisrael, of peoplehood. I don't feel that. It's definitely not with the younger generation, definitely with everything that's going on with BDS. I mean, it's very difficult. I said this last night to someone, that once upon a time when Israel was created, I felt that American Jews could be chin up and be proud. And now, in so many liberal circles, when you talk about Israel, it's like, you know, I don't want to wait. And a part of me is like, well, you know, Israel is the size of the state of New Jersey. Do all people in New Jersey agree on their politics? No. And so I'm not here representing a specific administration. I'm not here talking about I'm a citizen of the country. I'm trying to change things the way I see it. I'm a Zionist. I'm a liberal Zionist. I believe that Jews should have a sovereign state. I believe Jews all over the world should be proud of this country and feel that it's a good backup plan, whatever happens. I think that's part of the idea. But it can't always just be about the occupation. I mean, you can't always just have a conversation about politics. We're missing out. We're missing out on the slang and the food and the culture and the music and the film and the art. Things that are done in Israel today, it's living Judaism. When you turn on the radio, you hear beautiful Jewish music in Hebrew. That's redone, right? Pop music. You know, you sing, there's a song about Shema Yisrael that's written by the major pop star from the 70s. Modeh Ani is a song number 3 in the radio in Israel because it's written by sung by Omer Adam. This is what a Jewish country means. Sometimes I feel like in America, you're not getting any of the fun. You're just reading the CNN, the Fox, and whatever not, and you're saying, oy vey, why did Israel do that again? This looks so bad. And you're not enjoying any of the culture, the language, the society. That can be fixed by having personal connections, by having partnerships. And so I'm here with an agenda here in America. not just here today in New Jersey, I have an agenda. Let's revive these partnerships. Let's continue this conversation on a meaningful level. We won't agree always, we won't understand each other's, there are major cultural differences. I don't have to tell you, but I'm experiencing them myself. Even though I speak the American language, I'm mamash Israeli. And sometimes I'm like, whoa, that email was really nice, but I'm feeling something in my stomach. Oh, that's what passive aggressive is. Or like, you just cut us off 5 times. I'm like, I'm so sorry, I was getting passionate about conversation. And I'm late all the time. So, there are things that we definitely have to, we have to overcome. But the potential for Jewish continuity, the potential for Jewish people, the potential to be revived by, revive ourselves with different approaches. Just today, studying together, and I'm experiencing that all the time. I learn from here how things are done, and I'm going to come back a different rabbi to my congregation. I'm very, very excited about it. Okay, so as every rabbi, I spoke for too long. Not you. Just I would love to hear questions, comments, challenges, anything that was brought up or anything that wasn't brought up.
So you said that Holon was very Russian speaking?
It's a mix. So the Russian, a lot of Russians came, but it's very mixed. I can tell you my congregation has 10%, or maybe more, 15% Russian speakers, but it's pretty much the same percentage that you see in the entire state of Israel.
And how do you deal with people who, let's say, they come from traditional Judaism, the shtetls, where they've never seen reform, where they're used to women sitting on the second floor, and they're like, wait, what do you mean this is a synagogue? Even though they're not religious, but they want to go to the...
Right, so first of all, the shtetls haven't been around now for 100 years, so we're good with that. I can say that a lot of them, there are 3 kinds of congregants. A third, less than a third, a small percentage, but they are really invaluable, are people that have been exposed to Progressive Judaism. Because they lived in the States for a little bit, or because their parents were diplomats, or because they have a vague connection to Reform or conservative. A bunch of congregants are people that are, I call them PTSDs in Judaism, okay? My first marriage was Orthodox, I'm never doing that again after I've been divorced that way, or I just came back from my grandmother's burial and I was asked to step aside because I'm female, I'm never doing that again, right? So I get a lot of the angry ones, the ones who are like, I hate Judaism. No, you don't, Let me help you reconciliate with that. And the third group are like I grew up most of my life in Israel. It's like Chiloni. What does that mean, Chiloni? I am not Orthodox. I don't. Okay, but what do you do? So it's reclaiming that. I say to people, this doesn't work for everyone. If you have a congregation, a shtetl, anything that works for you, I'm not even talking to you. You're not my audience. You're playing tennis, I'm playing baseball. The ball is a Torah if you want to play with that, okay? So you do your thing. There's a bunch of people that are unaffiliated and disconnected. And my job as a rabbi is to say, look, this is a 1,000-year-old civilization. We ask the right questions, we might find something that inspires you. Some people, we lose them for the aesthetics because they're not used to seeing men and women sitting together, a woman with a talit, a woman reading Torah. I respect that, I have compassion for that. I know for a fact that the first female pilot felt the same, the first female politician felt the same, the first female dentist felt the same. This too shall pass. The aesthetics are changing, and people will get used to it. You gotta be patient, you gotta be compassionate, and you gotta laugh about it, right? Because there's no other way. The basis of a lot of our challenges in Israel are actually sexism, not orthodoxy. Because it's a Middle Eastern, militant, patriarchal society. That's what it is, right? So being a female rabbi, you're challenging that. But I'm also learned not to worry about what people will say. That's just in general, it's nice. I'm approaching 50, so it's good. I'm just like, you're not gonna make everyone happy, you're not pizza, right? It's like, different tastes, that doesn't work for you, it's fine, respectfully, move on.
So the reform movement in America is very concerned about the Kotel
Mhm.
and egalitarian spaces at the Kotel. That's been, right, that's the,
I know, Women
right.
of the Wall have done an amazing
Yeah,
job.
women of the wall, but I've read or I've talked to some colleagues that don't care about that. Like, who cares, right? When I go to the wall, I could care less. Like, I'm not moved there. Like, focus your energy on something else about equal pay, right? Like, what would you say to?
Well, the beauty of it, Anat Hoffman, who I love and adore, came to dinner like a couple of years ago. And we were sitting there and, having a lovely dinner and talking, and then she's like, Galit, she has a strong go. I'm disappointed in you. I don't see buses coming from Holon to Women of the Wall. Why? And I said to her, listen, social change is done in many ways. If we just choose one, we're missing out on other things. And it has to be, what's that tool? I love that tool in the kitchen, when you pick up something that has two sides that clip together, right? What do you call it?
Tongs,
right. Right.
I said Hebrew.
I don't know, but once
I
in
don't
southern, once in southern times I said tongs, and that was.
How do you say, how was it tongs?
Milkachaim. So this Milkachaim movement is really important. And you have to go. So the Kotel and its symbolism and its politics, super important. I have to say that many times when I go to places, they know what a female rabbi is because, you're probably a woman of the wall. I mean, go explain to them that not everyone who goes there are rabbis and there are Orthodox women there, don't get them confused. I see the significance of this. I believe, and my experience in the past almost 20 years has, I think, proven this. It's not the only way to make social change. Because not everyone wants to. I remember I told Anat, I said, if I go to the Kotel and a Haredi man spits at me, this might be, again, PTSD Judaism, of like someone spitting at me, it might be alienating. She's like, you've never experienced spiritual prayer until a Haredi person spits at you. I love that, right? If I bring that to my Holon congregation, am I crazy? That's a whole different language. So I think it's one bat mitzvah at a time and one Rosh Chodesh at the Kotel at a time. They don't contradict each other. But my strength is bottom up. And my language is the language of love and connectivity. The fights are there and they will come. And I'm asked a lot about Women of the Wall and I'm happy. They did awareness, raising awareness in the most beautiful way. But let's face it, I mean, we love symbols. But I want Holon to be on the map of liberal Judaism, not just the Kotel. Because in the Kotel, you're like, it's the friction of the zealots, and it's like the intensity. But I want you to feel the warmth and the hamishness. I don't know how to recover from that spitting and people ripping Reform Sidurim. I mean, that's terrible. It's being exposed to violence. Again, I adore the people who do it, but I think it's as important to come and have a meal with a Holon family that's half Moroccan and half Russian or Ukrainian, and hear their stories of coming to Israel, what it is the first time to come to egalitarian prayer, and what it is for them to have a female rabbi in their lives, and what it means to them to be part of a congregation. In Israel, your taxes go to pay for religious services, and here people pay membership. It's not close to what you do here, but just the mindset the change that has to happen for them to do it. So I'm saying elu ve'elu, it's both. I feel though that when we are if we just look at Israel through the Kotel, it's like it's examining the entire story of America through one, what happened in Texas a couple months ago in the Synagogue. That's Judaism in America, is it? Thank God, no. It's a part of what we're dealing with, but it's not the face of it all. I don't know if I answered your.
Yeah.
Okay. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Any other questions people have?
Please.
Reflections?
I'm curious about the term late what you described as like lazy Judaism, in the sense of like how that comes out in your congregation. Of course, Reform synagogues are thriving in America, but there's also challenges of attendance and our dedication to our synagogues and showing up. So have you seen in your congregation that it's actually encourage people they have to be active because they are building this from the ground up? And how do you work with that? Well, I'm Reform, so that means I don't have to go to services, or I don't have to do this, or the obligatory side of things.
Sure. Well, really asking, I mean, if I'll translate into how I hear it and tell me if you agree with this. How do you build commitment within a situation that you don't need that commitment to feel Jewish?
Right,
Okay.
that's,
okay.
yeah.
Does that, okay.
Mhm.
I think that is like the most exciting challenge, and I'm having so much fun with this, because believe it or not, services were the worst part of our communal life. The joke I have with Rabbi Galit is what I call him. I'm like, oh, we just opened another kindergarten, or our youth movement is, it's like, one day you'll pray Amidah. because that's not the main narrative of the story. I think when you're a community organizer, and again, I just came back from the CCR, so 300 rabbis. I'm gonna be a little sarcastic here. Everyone's whining, they're not showing up. I don't have a place that people show up or don't. Like, you show up where they are going. So we have hikes every week or month, and we have camping things, and we have a lot of chavurot that are doing things in homes. Like, we're only 3 people on staff. A rabbi, a community organizer, and like an assistant, not even full-time. So everything is lay-led. Everything is lay-led. So I tell my congregants, what do you need? There's a shiva? Let's go show up at the shiva house. Let's do a thing. Oh, someone gave birth? Let's send them food. Someone has COVID? Let's send them whatever they need. Let's help them, help with their kids, So I'm saying we need to show up. We can't sit in a sanctuary that we don't have and say no one's showing up. And it kicks you in the tuchus to think outside the box. Like the thrift store, we have more volunteers in the thrift store than we'll have ever to do shamasim. It's so much fun to volunteer, and tell me it's not as Jewish. Okay, so the services, they happen, they're like the heart of it. And sometimes it fluctuates up, and sometimes it goes down, and sometimes it's fine. But that's not the focal point. I think it's hard for us to say that. Like coming to an American congregation saying, services is not the most important thing you're doing here. It's like, are you crazy? Like the sermon isn't the most important, inspirational.
That is.
I'm pushing my boundaries here. Your sermons are. It's the other sermons that don't happen. And I'm being very honest, as you can tell. I think also this whole idea of like, we need a rabbi to say a bracha.
Yeah.
Sorry, you don't. We need a rabbi to put a mezuzah. You don't, right? I can teach you how to put a mezuzah. It's like I started watching the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Got the rabbi! Yeah, we're still there. You don't need a rabbi to do Havdalah. You don't need a rabbi to do Torah study. Rabbis are important. Please, let's take care of our rabbis. Let's be nice to our rabbis. Hakol b'sedem, as we say. But empowering people, individuals, smaller groups, and I always say, if there are 9 more people that are affinity group to you, you got a million. Now I need to show up. It's not that you need to show up. If you're telling me my 9 golf friends, all of us want to do some kind of a, we want to learn theology and we want to talk to our Christian friends. You're making me work. It's not the other way around. I'm not sitting there and saying you're late, you didn't show up to services because you were golfing. That's not my place to do, right? So it has to do a lot with how we measure success. And I think you are adding to your team this wonderful musician, Shimon. Shimon and I worked a lot together. He comes to Holon a lot. So he's seen, he'll tell you behind the scenes. He'll tell you how the sausage is made, right? Shimon and I would come and be like with 3 people and be like, oh my God, this is a flop. And he would come and do with 300 people. So he's seen it all. And he really he sees how we work in Holon, so he can tell you, right? The idea of just listening to what people need and really being attentive to changing times, right? There was a huge teacher strike now in Sacramento. So many of the congregants were, and I'm looking around and I'm thinking, if this strike goes on for another week, we should probably just open the sanctuary, like open the community in the morning and have, things for kids to come and do here and not go crazy with it. Like, is it a Jewish thing? It's a strike. Why do I have to give childcare? But this is what people need right now. And if this congregation, any congregation, give an answer to people's needs, then you're relevant. You stay relevant. And I think that's super important. And I'm not talking about pleasing. I'm not saying, what do people want? People want to eat, and so let's just get a lot of food. By the way, the congregation Holon, we made a decision years ago, we don't pay for food. We don't have the budget for it. So people want to eat, bring food. Oh gosh, there's so much food. Everything is a potluck. Everything, and I mean pots of luck, right? So it's a different mindset. You're not acquiring a service. You're not a consumer. You're not passive. But you want this to happen. You're part of the system. I know how to do it with 150 families. I humbly do not know how you do it with how many?
950.
Okay, it's a very different.
Well, I think, and that's something we're thinking about, right? So like, and I think what you're saying about the affinity groups or like the small circles is I think it's someplace we learn, right? So we have, what I'm thinking about is we have many people from the former Soviet Union and who may perhaps have grew up here as well. And like, what would it mean to look like it as to have an affinity group of, and not that it's run by us, but run by a group of people that are coming together, or artists. Like we're missing, like I feel like we need, what's the artist community look like, or what is a young family Havara type thing, but I think that's the way that we can do it. And in a large synagogue, 950 feels very big, and so how do we make, which is, right, it was great to bring in great big speakers, to have awesome big events outside, which makes our community really vibrant, which is really important, but how do we also make those smaller connections?
For sure, and I think COVID also taught us, first of all, I always joke that COVID was the celebration for the introverts, right? The ones like, I don't have to see anyone, it's great. But I've learned a lot from that, because at the end of the day, these mega conferences are really important, but the meaningful connection is that if I don't see you in a couple of weeks, I just check in with you. That can't happen in a large scale event. So it's both. Again, it's both. But and it's not giving up on either. It's not saying, but these large sanctuaries are sometimes a challenge for a lot of renewal.
Yeah. So we're running out of a little time.
Of
I did
course,
get an
yes.
email from someone who was at the CCR conference who said that I must ask you about Jesus Christ's comment. So Rabbi Ellen Lewis, who's a member of our temple, she wanted me to make sure you tell that story.
Oh, that's very cute. Now they're curious. Like, why did you talk about Jesus Christ? Okay, so thank you. I led Shacharit services at the conference, and I told the story before Shema Yisrael. So I noticed, and this is, I think it's the epitome of what it means to be an Israeli Jew, right? When something scares out of you, what's the word that comes out of your mouth in America? Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, holy shit, right? I'm noticing that. Rabbis are like, Jesus Christ. How did that trigger into this conversation, right? In Holon, and this I'm seeing with my teens, kids, someone just cuts you in the street, you know what people say? Shema Yisrael. And I love that. And I even heard that some people say Shmas, which is the abbreviation. Shema Yisrael. So, and that's a good example of how Judaism is alive, because that's the word you pull, that's the phrase you pull when you need to express, like, and I love that. And I want Judaism and Hebrew to be more present, right? I joke, like, American Reform Judaism is in love with the Shehechianu prayer. It's like Shehechianu and Tikkun Olam, that's all I'm hearing, right? And I'm like, that's awesome, and every moment is a Shehechianu moment, Hakol Beseder, but there must be more, right? So I think that the conversation between the oceans, right, between the Bavel and Eretz Yisrael, the Babylonia and Israel, those are fruitful, they're inspiring, they start something new. And that's what I'm hoping for.
So we should say Shehechianu for your first visit to us. But so no, thank you, Galit. This was really amazing, and I think, and I believe that that relationships is the way to deepen our connection to the larger peoplehood, to Klal Yisrael, to Jews in Israel. I think that's where we need to create deep connections, and it's not just a visit, but it's a dialogue, it's conversation, it's knowing who our brothers and sisters in Israel are, and it's and learning the best things that are happening in Israel, and the best things that are happening in America. I think we're doing that with Shimon Smith. I've heard that where do you find out what's happening with the music is in Israel, and so bringing Shimon here. We'll also have an Israeli cantorial intern as well, so we will be heavily
Beautiful.
So
We're brushing up on our Hebrew.
We're brushing up on our Hebrew, but thank
You
you.
should brush up on their suits.
So thank you for just sharing your warmth and sharing your story and sharing your community, and we hope that we can really build that relationship over the next many years. So, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us online.
Yeah.
Oh, that was fun.
I will
Bye.
write myself below, like I should.
That's why I heard a lot of Russian.
Yeah.